Housing for me is the manifestation of all the political tensions we can see in the world. So we see discrimination, racism, all the inequalities that exist within our society that we can discuss, that we can think about. As an activist, you might want to change it, but they still can be very abstract terms. And in housing, everything comes together. And you fight for a building, you fight for a neighborhood, you want to change in very concrete terms a certain area. And that also helps because it makes the connection not only between you and a building and an area, but also mostly between you and the other people that care for this space.
The energy transition is happening, but is it fair? Is it working for people like you and me, or just for big market players? Welcome to Energ'Ethic. I am Marine Cornelis, an expert in energy and climate policies, and I bring you the voices shaping our energy future. Activists, scientists, policymakers, the real people making real change, often against the odds. Here, we do not settle for surface-level takes. We dig into the challenges, the solutions, and the lessons that do not always make the headlines. And in doing so, we rediscover something vital, our ability to trust in institutions, to believe in change, and to reclaim our power to act. Because if we want just resilience, if we want just transition, we need to understand what it takes to make it happen. And more importantly, we need to believe that we can. Let's get into it.
This episode of Energ'Ethic takes us to the Amsterdam's housing battleground. Our guest is Mirte Jepma, a PhD researcher, feminist activist, and documentary maker whose work shines a spotlight on bottom-up resistance to urban renewal. At just 26, Mirte is already reshaping the conversation around affordable housing, urban politics, and collective ownership. With a background in politics, philosophy, and urban studies, she blends academic research with the grassroots activism, and her recent film, The Sinking Fringe, tells the moving story of a neighbourhood facing erasure under Amsterdam's development agenda. Listening to Mirte, I was struck by how eerily familiar her stories of displacement and resistance felt, echoing research I did earlier this year on the challenges of summer energy poverty, and also in 2022 on the risk of renovation waves in the urban green transition. The language may differ, but the dynamics repeat across borders. Policies meant to create livable cities too often strip them of the very people who give them life. In this conversation, we dive into what it means to co-create knowledge with affected communities, how to blend research papers with a camera lens, and why feminist and care-centered urbanism might just be the path forward. It's also a moment to pause and ask, how can we ensure that urban transition are not just green, but also fair? Expect a deeply thoughtful journey into the politics of belonging, the power of community resistance, and what it truly means to call a place home, having a room of one's own. Mirte, welcome to Energ'Ethic.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So, Mirte, when preparing this podcast, you described yourself as still figuring things out, and I love it. It's very honest. So instead of asking, who are you? I would like to start with, what drew you to housing as a political and personal question?
Good question. Big question as well. Housing for me is the manifestation of all the political tensions we can see in the world. So we see discrimination, racism, all the inequalities that exist within our society that we can discuss, that we can think about. As an activist, you might want to change it, but they still can be very abstract terms. And in housing, everything comes together. And I studied also politics, and I really like to analyze the inequalities in our everyday life. But what I missed in my studies was the question, what are we talking about? And for me, once I started to focus on housing, this changed because housing is the embodiment of those inequalities in society. And it can also be a very concrete goal. If you want to fight for something, you fight for a building, you fight for a neighborhood, you want to change in very concrete terms a certain area. And that also helps because it makes the connection not only between you and a building and an area, but also mostly between you and the other people that care for this space.
Yeah, I love that. I feel that housing for me has become over the years really the kind of symbol of what it means to be feeling safe in really like grounded. And 5 years ago, we had COVID, right? And everybody had to retreat home. And then for a lot of people, they realized how much of a sanctuary it was, but not only the home itself, but also the neighborhood and the surroundings and the people we were living with. So that makes really a lot of sense, right? Also because being 26, it also means that you kind of started your studies during COVID and you experienced this housing being so central into so many developments, so many conversations. And now at European level, we have also a European Commissioner for Energy and Housing. So those kind of two questions are put together, and it's becoming really like it's now impossible to separate the two. And this kind of feeling safe is really like at the bottom of this kind of Maslow pyramid of the human needs, right? So feeling safe in your home is like the groundwork for feeling safe in general, right?
Yes, it's very important. I really like the book by Virginia Woolf, A Room of One's Own. It's a feminist book talking about the importance of having a space for yourself, and especially coming from the part where women are always in either the public space or even if it's a private space, they have a lot of things to do. They are expected to do all the domestic labor. To then have a room of your own in which you can work on your own thoughts, in which you can develop yourself as an identity, as a person, that's really important. And that's also what I experienced when I got this place where I'm living now. I live by myself in a very nice studio apartment. And for me, it really opened also the possibility to start like deciding for myself, where do I want to spend my time on? How do I do that? Create your own nest. And yeah, this has been, I think, important for me trying to figure out who I am or what I want to be and do in life. Yeah.
Oh, that's beautiful. And I can see that it's all yellow and colorful. I love that. To our listeners and video viewers, we didn't coordinate on the flowers, but yeah, I guess we have at least this in common on top of the rest. But yeah, and now you are also living in the Amsterdam social housing system or public housing system. So can you tell us also about this journey into moving into this kind of housing, right?
Yes, so Amsterdam, internationally seen, still has a large share of social housing. It used to be way more. After the Second World War, there was really this intention to create housing for all and to create housing as a basic human right. There were many unions, like associations, originally from also workers' associations, creating affordable living. And I think one of the main differences between affordable housing in the Netherlands and outside of the Netherlands is that the Dutch architecture at one point after the Second World War wanted to create housing for the people, but with the same kind of quality as for rich people that could afford a house. So the intention was that you cannot see from the outside or from the inside if housing is social housing or not. Also, in location-wise, you see that you have one building that is social housing, another building that is not social housing, or even in the same building, you have different floors. One is social housing, one is not. So it's the same building. From the outside, you cannot see it. And I think this is an important difference if you compare it with other spaces, such as Milan, where I also lived. You have big housing blocks for social housing or affordable housing. Outside of the city, they are not always well maintained. There's a lot of, like, say, negative image of these housings. Of course, this has also to do with the lack of investment and taking housing seriously by the government. But at least we had this time period in which generally the politics and architecture took social housing extremely serious. So where I am living right now is quite a central area. My building is social housing. My neighbors are not social housing. I pay 1/3 of what my neighbors pay for the same square meters. The difference has been huge and it's only growing, although we see some sort of trend trying to stop the market from making housing too unaffordable in Amsterdam at the moment. And so your question of how I got into this housing is I'm from Amsterdam. And being from Amsterdam, you can do on your 18th birthday, it's the best thing ever, is to enlist yourself for social housing. So that's what I did. On my 18th birthday, I enlist myself for social housing, which meant that I am now living in a social housing for 5 years that is geared for young people. So you can only access until you're 23 years old. And 2 days before my birthday, I got this house because I had the longest waiting time and I was almost 23. So that's when the opportunity came. I can still live here for 1 more year. And this is this different segment of the social housing. There, the turnover rate is a little bit faster. So more people have the opportunity to live in social housing.
Yeah, it must really ease the life of the students and prevent Amsterdam from being only a museum or touristic attraction, right? Because that's always that's a big struggle that many European cities do have. How do you keep residents downtown? How do you make sure people actually experience the city and it's not only becoming more beautiful or sustainable only for tourists, right?
Yeah. It's adding a little bit, but it's also surely not enough. And this is the whole problem, is that Amsterdam is an extremely expensive city to live. The social housing associations have changed over the years, become much more liberalized, much more financialized. So they're also selling off buildings. And in general, the maximum income that you can get is lowered by the government at one point, so that middle class cannot enter the social housing. Whereas once, when it was created, the social housing, it was for the, let's say, working and middle classes. So it was meant for the majority of the people. And then at one point, the government said, well, we should all want to buy a house instead of rent a house. With this philosophy, they changed the income. And that had a very big impact on the availability of social housing. And having said that, it's also extremely unfair because indeed I was lucky enough to enroll when I was 18 and on the day of my birthday. But you also need to have somebody in your environment that tells you when you're 18, you have to enroll because otherwise you are not having the opportunity anymore. And now they changed a little bit this system. Now it's about being active with applying and you get certain points and those points determine your waiting time. So they try to make it a little bit more inclusive for people that come here or that didn't know about that you have to be 18 years old when you enroll. But there are still a lot of benefits that certain people know or certain skills that you need that certain people know and other people don't. And this has, of course, some also exclusionary effects.
Of course, it's not only about having the right and trend, but having really the capabilities to enforce this kind of right. So that's really interesting. But okay, there is something that really struck me in already your very insightful journey is that you decided to make a documentary called The Sinking Fringe to tell the story of a neighborhood called Bijbord West. So what is the story behind Bijbord West and why did you go for a documentary?
Yeah, so Bijbord West is a neighborhood in Amsterdam East that has in the last 50 years been organized more or less organically. There have been a lot of artists that settled there. People started to open their businesses or workspaces. A lot of it had been temporary. The ground had been temporarily leased from the municipality. And at the time when this area kind of was created, it was considered outside of Amsterdam. So hence the urban fringe, because it's a fringe area. Right now, with the city growing, it has become quite a central location and also quite a good development location, especially also for the municipality to earn some money with either, they don't really sell the land, but they rent it out for long-term contracts to developers. So the municipality, with the desire to build more houses, said we are going to redevelop this area. And in light of this redevelopment, everybody that's living there now has to go. With everybody already having a temporary contract, this should not be difficult, like easy job, people go. then they remove everything, so all the houses, but also all the greenery, and it has been a very green area, to raise the land with 7 meters of soil, because this particular area is sinking. Everything in Amsterdam is sinking. So the conventional way of building is that you first put on some soil and you leave that for a couple of years so it can sink in until it settles and you have a stable ground level where you can then build on.
Okay, hence the sinking fringe.
Hence the sinking fringe.
Okay.
And how I came to make a documentary is that in this area, the residents united and said, we, first of all, don't want to go, but secondly, we think it's a very stupid plan, because if you demolish everything, all the greenery, all the community that is living there, you will never get it back. And if you then use the sand to make the new area, it's going to cost you enormously, not only in real economic terms, but also the environment. It's a very old-fashioned way of thinking about how do you make cities. Mm-hmm. Whereas actually the municipality has lots of policies in which the social side is centralized, nature is centralized. So they united, they worked together with professionals and made an alternative plan that includes as many houses as the municipal plan. My documentary is telling this story. So it's telling the story of the people living there now, how they live. They live in communities where the community life is very important. I tell the story of this community life and how they imagine the future if they would design the area, if they would propose this alternative plan. What would that look like?
It makes me think as a story about this neighborhood in Copenhagen. Do you remember the name? I can't remember the name now.
Christiania?
Yeah, exactly. It was Christiania, right? That was abandoned, and then the municipality decided to take over, and the residents opposed, and also because it had become such a haven for creation and artists, etc. And now it's one of the jewels of the city, right? So has this kind of conversation happened yet, or are there still any tensions between the city developers and the residents about the kind of future of this area?
Yeah, it's funny that you refer to Christiania. I think in many ways Amsterdam and Christiania have a lot of commonalities. They both have a great squatters history, not only a history, but also a reality that is still very much alive. And I think Amsterdam is also a city that is a capital still of the creative squatters that are going against the economic way of designing the city. And so this tension is still there, for sure. The municipality also, we spoke with the municipality multiple times, and they are not very open to change their plans. They have mostly said that we as a collective, because I also joined the collective, we as a collective were too late with our alternative plan, which was a difficult answer to hear, because the moment that the residents were informed about the plans of the municipality, that was the moment in which we very fast made this alternative plan. And then when we said, okay, you just came up with this plan, you want us to participate, we have this alternative plan. They said, no, now it's too late. You should have told us before, or difficult. So there are a lot of tensions, and this area, they already started to demolish it.
Okay, so there are certainly some kind of recourse, legal recourse and actions to be undertaken, right? Because on the Amsterdam side, if there was any consultation any day, you should have been, at least the residents should have been informed. So is it something that you also denounce in the film?
Well, the legal side is indeed very interesting. They all had temporary contracts, which meant that the municipality has the right to end the contract. Some contracts would have ended. They always had temporary contracts, and those temporary contracts had been renewed in the last 30 years, every second year, something like this, every time a 2 years contract. I don't know. But the point is that they don't have formalized housing rights, not in the same way that you have the housing right if you buy a house.
Okay.
So that's very different. And you see this with all the creative communities in Amsterdam, is that they don't have the formalized rights. They always have the temporary use rights of the area. And when the use will be different, namely housing or something else or industry, then you see that those creative communities are very forcefully demolished and pushed away, usually they settle somewhere else. So it's, in a way, it's an organism that moves around the city. But you see that with the city growing and the costs for living growing as well, you also see some communities leaving Amsterdam. And I think that the identity, this creative identity, is extremely important. And it hurts me as an Amsterdammer to feel that these places are not as much appreciated somehow in the greater scheme of things. Whereas for me, they make the city, they make why I want to live here.
Yeah. They make it a room of your own, right? Your creative outlet, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And so your creative outlet, you decided to go for a documentary. Was it to finally give a voice to the residents of this area? Because a documentary itself, that must be quite something just to kind of put together. So what's the backstory? Why film? Why a documentary with a film crew, etc.? And what was your role?
Yeah. So I have always been very much interested in documentary making or photography, image, visuals. I never made a documentary. This is the first that I made. And the opportunity came when I was in a research group. And this research group was from an ethnographic perspective, looking at the role of democracy or democratic citizenship and property. And this research group had in its methods to use film. And I joined the research group all the way at the end. And then I proposed this project and they were in full support. So that gave me the support that I needed to start this project. I then collaborated with a small team. We are in 4. One is my partner, who is already a documentary maker. So he had been a fantastic help and he did all the cinematography. So all the nice, so that it becomes also like a real documentary product. All the credit go to him. And then I've been with 2 other residents, ex-residents. One is an artist of the island. She knows everything about the history of the island, about the other struggles of other similar spaces in the same area. So great storytelling and history. And then the other one is an editor who has been absolutely fantastic. So with this great small team, we actually managed to pull it off. It has been beyond my expectations and I'm very proud and happy. Yeah.
Where can we find this documentary? Is it online?
It's not yet online, but it's on an Instagram account called De Zinkende Ravelrand, because it's in Dutch. Okay. But it also, you can find it when you Google for the Sinking Fringe. With my name, you will find the Instagram and there we will post the new screenings, and where you can find it online, you will also find it there.
That's great and really super inspiring. And I wish you the best of luck with this endeavor, because really it seems to be like what you are sharing about this neighborhood seems that it's some kind of a known, undervalued, but beating heart of the community of Amsterdam as a city, and makes it what it is. And without the possibility for creative expression, it would kind of lose its soul. So it seems quite an important endeavor to undertake, right? And you have been really also working in academia, right, on collaborative housing models. And this kind of collaborative housing models, it goes beyond social housing. What do you mean by this kind of practices or models? And because the idea behind is that they are combining affordability, accessibility, autonomy too, right?
Yeah, that's indeed the great promise. We have affordability, accessibility, and autonomy with collaborative housing. So collaborative housing is an umbrella term that encompasses all forms of shared ownership. Okay. So whereas you have private property, which is you or with a family, you buy a house, it's your property. You have public property, then it's the state, it's social housing. And this is collaborative property, collective property. So with a group of people, you own the building. And then you have you own the land. And you have different models of how to actually do that. One of the models that is currently in Amsterdam, for example, reappearing is a cooperative model, in which with a group of people, you found a cooperative, so a collective. And this cooperative then owns the building. And you, as a member of the cooperative, you rent it from the cooperative. So that means you pay the rent, but the rent goes towards a collective mortgage that the collective had to take out to buy or build the property. And this is a way in which housing can be affordable in the extreme long term, because no individual can decide to sell it. And that's, I think, the main point, is that no individual will be able to profit from it, not as an investment, also not as a social security for retirement, but you will have a stable housing opportunity. And once the mortgage is paid off, instead of saying, okay, we don't have any housing costs anymore, they continue to pay rent. However, it will go into a fund that can then provide more affordable loans to other cooperatives that want to establish themselves. So they will start to create this, let's say, collaborative or cooperative economy in which they will build more and more of these housing systems that can still provide affordable living.
Yeah, and it really goes for the long run, right? Because it's not only about funding the current building block or something, but really go for affordability in the long run for a different kind of housing as well. Yeah, where I live, there is this kind of trend for co-living. Would be like having an extra room that people can share. So as a bedroom for guests, or a playground for kids, or a space where people can go and work or have meetings if they want. So it's also becoming a model. And that sounds really interesting, because everyone I know, and myself included, like, I love my house, it's just that my apartment, just that I would love to have an extra room. Maybe not every day, but from time to time, I would love to have that. And that responds to a very concrete need, right? And if it can be co-owned and co-shared, that makes a lot of sense. Also because the expenses are less important, right? So that makes it more affordable. So that makes a lot of sense, and would also be very practical and very easy. And I guess that in a city such as Amsterdam, where, as you explained, the pressure on the housing market is so important, that would be even more relevant. But so those kind of collaborative housing models, is it just in Amsterdam, or have you seen them in other contexts? Because you've also lived in Milan, you worked in Barcelona too. So is it something, how frequent can this kind of model can be found?
Yeah, you see them really all over Europe. And also I studied Europe, so I know it in Europe, but you see them all over the world.
Okay.
And I know that there are plenty of models of this, like this, in Europe. But one of the differences is indeed this ownership, and how do you actually organize it. So for example, I've studied indeed in Milan, looked at the cooperativa, so also the cooperative sector. And there I saw some differences, because when we talk about co-housing, it's indeed often you share collectively some shared spaces, such as an extra bedroom, maybe a laundry facility, maybe a workspace area, or an additional kitchen. But these are always extra spaces in which community can happen, but they don't actually diminish the private space that you have. And they also don't question the ownership ways in which the building is structured. So, for example, people still own their private apartment, and then they co-own a share of the community kitchen. If you organize it like this, it's not going against the market, because that means that you as a private individual can still decide to sell your apartment and make a big profit. And if you from the start as a collective do not have very strict guidelines on what you want and what your vision is, then I think that this will be posing also a threat to the community that you're trying to start. Because usually these groups start with values such as sustainability, community, sharing, but you need also to be able to sustain those same values over time. And the increase of your real estate value is posing a direct and important threat that not everybody is understanding in this way. Because if you actually make a model that can facilitate this affordability, that also means that you as a private individual can no longer profit from the big investment that you once made. And it is true that our economy is running on on housing, and especially in, for example,
True.
context like Italy, everybody said it's super important for them as a social security, also for their future, for their kids, their pension, and that's difficult to change.
Yeah, in Italy, people, in fact, tend to have keep a lot of money on their bank account. They don't invest, but they buy apartments. And like you have 85 or 90% of the people who live in an apartment they actually own. So, or I also know some people who rent the place where they live, but they still have 1 or 2 apartments on the side. So it's a very different dynamics, right? It's a very different process. But yeah, that's very interesting because you can really compare, you have the ability to compare the different models throughout Europe. And that's also why you were involved in a major conference in Barcelona with the tenant unions, right?
Yeah.
So what were the kind of common threads you saw in this kind of global housing struggles? Because I feel that maybe the stock market go up and down, but the housing, it's always there. Like it's always like it's seen as something very stable. So people should keep on investing there.
Yeah. So we organized together with our university project at the University of Ghent, together with the Barcelona Tenants Union, we organized a conference or an encuentro in which we invited many different tenant unions from all over the world, predominantly Europe and North America and Canada, to come together and to share the skills. And this has been huge because actually a lot of the fights that are happening on a very local basis are against landlords that are international landlords. Their financial world is a global world. So quite often it's the same landlord that we are fighting against. And it's also the same financial models that they use. For example, they combine the mortgages of multiple buildings and they lump them together into one financial scheme. And this portfolio is so big that only another big real estate investor can take over that portfolio, which means that it's completely out of the scope of any municipality that wants to municipalize the real estate market, or any government that wants to, any individual person. It's a massive scale. And I think those are one of the many issues. But this is a very important issue that we currently have with housing and the investment schemes that are behind this housing.
But it's also very interesting because in many contexts, and given the urgency of climate change and the fact that the European Union set up a goal of renovating, like making deep renovation of 3% of the housing in Europe each year. Now we have about 75% of the housing and buildings that are not energy efficient. So in a way, those kind of big investors are seen as the only one with enough money and leverage to make the kind of renovation happen. A few years ago, I also wrote a report with the FENSA, which is the organization working with the homeless, on how to avoid a renoviction wave. Like it's exactly the phenomenon you mentioned earlier about like renovation leading to eviction. And it's still very difficult because those kind of enormous actors, they are somehow not held accountable. They are really perceived as only like, okay, they are doing what's needed, so we let them go, right? Whereas they would need to be more involved in the conversation and for proper safeguards and policies to be set up so that people actually can still live and own the place they live, whatever the ownership model, right?
Yeah, you see that indeed there's that we just need a huge amount of investments for the renovations to happen. And at least I can't speak for every context, but I know the Dutch context in which also this renovation need has been known for many years. And there's been also, for example, the social housing do not always invest in their property because it has this speculative it's also a speculative asset, and especially also international landlords do this. So we see that there's this because of the neglected state of the property that makes it into an unlivable space in some cases with draft and mold and extremely high energy cost. that those spaces are now so expensive to renovate that they say, well, the only person that can do this is a private is a private company on the market. And that's why we need to, well, I think that this is indeed creating only more lock-in effects that we already saw in the history of housing when we wanted to liberate the housing markets and created all these financial landlords. It's not going to help the people in the end. And I think this is something that I hope people in power to make policies are more and more understanding that, yes, okay, we can collaborate with the market. It's not that everybody in the market is always bad, but this profit seeking that's behind it needs to be understood really well, and the impact that it has, because housing, like energy, is a basic human need. And if you make that into a speculative gambling game, the people are the losers. That's always.
Yeah, you mentioned energy, and now you have shifted to a PhD focused more on heat networks and energy communities. So please tell us more about how does that connect with your earlier housing work. We've been talking a lot, of course, in this podcast and in this episode and in general about the links between housing and energy. But in this particular case, what is your specific focus? And is energy like the next battle?
Is energy the next battle? I definitely think that energy will be a big battle. And the link is community and the common property. So I looked at housing as a big battle and the role of community and the role of common property. And what if we collectivize the ownership? And now actually I'm doing the same, but then for energy, saying what is the role of community and what happens if we collectivize, let's say, the means of production, to take some Marxist terms, but what if we collectivize the ownership over our heat or our energy production? And I'm specifically looking at two cases. One is in Amsterdam, the other one is in Culemborg, both in the Netherlands. And both cases are communities, so resident-led groups that organize themselves in a cooperative, and then they produce the energy for their neighborhood, and they own the means of production. So they own the infrastructure, and they also manage it. And that becomes very interesting because then you don't have an energy company that also needs to make a profit.
Yeah.
And you see, especially with the heat transition, which is in Amsterdam a big debate at the moment, because we have such small houses, small scales, small spaces in the city, that it's very hard to do, for example, an all-electric transition, because that means that you need big spaces for the boilers, especially if everybody individually buys a heat pump. It will be very noisy. It will be, not everybody has the space, not everybody has the money. So who actually will have the comfort will be the people that can afford more. Yeah. So the collective solution in Amsterdam, they say it's a heat network. Okay. And now the municipality collaborated with a private partner, Vattenfall, the international energy company, to make a heat network available for the city. And this has caused many problems, and especially tenants stood up and said, we don't want that, because we are paying a lot more for a private company that then they are a monopolist, and we cannot choose who we want to have the heat from, because there's only one supplier, and this is an international company seeking profit. And eventually, the whole thing stopped. So the entire collaboration and the move towards this rolling out of the heat network for social housing at the moment stopped. The only project that is still going on is in social housing is this community-based one. So it's also showing the power of trust that it can give to tenants or to anyone if it's a community-based and co-owned project.
Yeah, that's really interesting. That totally reflects the conversation I had last week with the practitioners and academics from Africa who were discussing community energy project. It was more related to solar, but they also, one of the conclusions of our discussion was really that whenever you go into some kind of collective ownership model, you actually, with proper collaboration, with proper ownership from the community, you actually encounter so much less resistance. It gets accepted so much faster that in a way, that should be a no-brainer, right? Because once you build that trust, when you build that trust in the infrastructure, when you build that trust in a common future, common narrative, you actually build a better future for everyone, and you encounter less opposition, and that's much easier to roll out and much faster. But this research you are conducting is in the context of the Prefigure project, right?
Yes.
So tell us more about this Prefigure project, and that will be the end of our episode. Thank you so much.
Yeah. So the Prefigure project is a Horizon Europe project, and it's a collaboration with 7 different countries and different universities or research centers in these countries. And we all look at the innovations that are currently seen on tackling the housing energy struggles. Okay. And what we mean with the housing energy struggles is that we have looked, I'm saying we, but I mean like researchers, practitioners, activists have looked at housing, we have looked at energy, but energy and housing together also form a lot of new challenges and a lot of new inequalities in our society. And with our project, we are looking at innovative practices that are challenging the inequalities of the housing energy nexus. So when housing and energy meets. And those innovative practices, we call them prototypes. So hence also prefigure. They are prefiguring perhaps new pathways to the future. And we look at those new prototypes, and one of them is the collaborative heat network in Amsterdam that I'm researching.
Okay. Mirte, I would like to let you 1 more minute to wrap things up and tell us what are your hopes for the future, given all those years as an activist, now as a researcher. You're unstoppable.
Well, I don't know about that. But my hope for the future, I put all my hope and trust in the community. And I hope that people that show this energy and this collective vision, it being also shared by community, are more often taken seriously. I see it in my research that the community that established the heat network in Amsterdam was struggling to be recognized. But I also see it from my own perspective with the community that I collaborated with, also the documentary, with our alternative plan. We feel unseen and not taken seriously, especially because maybe you're just a resident, as if that doesn't mean that you also have a professional take or that you can have just a really good idea. And I hope that this community aspect can be more often easier, like earlier recognized, supported, and then we will have a much more collaborative future.
I love that. And Mirte, warm welcome to the Energ'Ethic community, because that's also what I hope to be building with this podcast. Thank you so much. And we will definitely keep on being in touch, and I will put everything in the show notes. Thank you so much, Mirte.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Energ'Ethic. It's been a pleasure diving deep into the world of sustainability and the just energy transition with some of the most forward-thinking mouths out there. I'm Marine Cornelis, your host from policy consultancy Next Energy Consumer, and it's been an incredible journey growing this podcast together with you, our knowledgeable and passionate listeners. Since 2021, we've shared countless stories, insights, and ideas over more than 40 episodes, and it's all thanks to your support and enthusiasm. If you enjoyed our journey so far and want to help us keep the conversation going, why not support us on Patreon? Every bit helps us bring more inspiring content your way. Check out the show notes for the link. And hey, if you're a part of an organization that shares our passion for a sustainable and inclusive energy future, we're excited to explore sponsorship opportunities with you. It's a fantastic way to connect with a dedicated audience and make an even bigger impact together. Shout out to the fantastic Igor Mihailovich from Podcast Media Factory for his incredible sound design work, making every episode a joy to listen to. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to Energ'Ethic on your favorite podcast platform. And if you think a friend or a colleague could benefit from our episode, we'd love for you to spread the word. It helps us grow and keep the energy transition conversation alive. Sharing is caring.
Follow us on Twitter and LinkedIn to stay engaged and update on all things energetic. Thanks once again for lending your ears. Until next time.